So how does the Canon M50 hold up in low light situations? In this video, I'm going to put its high ISO performance to the test and compare it to a big camera like the Canon 5D Mark IV. Stick around. So if you're ever going to be shooting in low light situations, one of the most important features of a digital camera is how it holds up in high ISO low light situations. I've been shooting with the Canon 5D Mark IV for a few years now, and I really love its performance at ISO 6400, 12,800, and I even get some shots using ISO of 25,600. So while the Canon M50 has been holding up pretty well in comparison to big cameras in a lot of situations, I really wanted to find out how well it did using the high ISO. So I took my M50 out, got some low light shots, and got some of the same shots using my 5D Mark IV. And we're going to jump into the computer and we're going to compare them side by side to see what they really look like and how well the M50 performs.
Okay, so I've made a fairly simple composition here and imported the photos into Lightroom. So I shot this at ISO 100, 800, 6400, and 25,800, just to give a sense of the differences between the two cameras at these different ISOs. So if I want to look at this shot here, which was shot on the M50 at ISO 100, and zoom in tight, you can see it's nice and clean. Nice clean image, no noise, everything's nice and smooth. And if I look at the same shot taken with the 5D4 at ISO 100, I'm going to get a very similar result. Nice and clean, nothing wrong with it, and they look basically both the same shot from the two cameras. Now this is a lot of what we've been saying here is, you know, when you compare the M50 with some of these big pro cameras like the 5D Mark IV at ideal conditions, nice bright conditions, you can shoot with a low ISO, you can shoot at a small aperture, you're not going to see really any difference between the M50 and a camera like the 5D4 in ideal conditions. So if that's where you're shooting, if that's where you're doing most of your shooting, you're really not going to see any difference in performance between the two. This is the 5D4, and this is the M50 in comparison. Now if I want to open up the shadows to see what kind of noise we have in there, I'll open it all the way up. And you can see, even cranked all the way up to 100 on the shadows, in these dark spots here, it doesn't look great, but there's still not any noise. You know, I can play around with the editing in Lightroom, make this look nicer, but as far as noise goes, there's really nothing to complain about here. And if I do the same thing with the image from the 5D4, bring those shadows all the way up, it basically looks the same. Again, at a low ISO like that, you're not really going to see much of a difference. If there is a difference, it's really a stretch to find a significant enough difference for it to really matter. So moving up to ISO 800, and this is your typical low light situation. You're indoors, but it's brightly lit. ISO 800 is the kind of setting you're going to use in nominally dark situations. So even there on the M50, you can see a little bit of noise in the brighter areas there. Let's take a look at the same shot with the 5D4 shot at ISO 800. It looks very similar. I would say the 5D4 is definitely a little bit better. This is the M50. Go back to the 5D4. Noise-wise, the advantage definitely goes to the 5D4, but it's not a huge difference. Let me open up those shadows to see what that looks like. This is in the 5D4. You can see definitely there's some noise in there, but nothing that's going to really hurt your image. Going back to the M50 image, to open up the shadows there, and you're definitely seeing some grain. You're seeing a lot of noise in the shadows, and even in the brighter spots when I bring those shadows up in the M50 image. But again, not significant enough to make much of a difference, but definitely an advantage to the 5D4. Now, when I bump my ISO up to 6400, which typically that's my maximum ISO for usability with the 5D4, because it's in dark situations. If I can open my aperture up really wide, shoot at 1.4, shoot at ISO 6400, I can typically get good handheld shots even in dark situations using that ISO. Here's the M50 with the same shot taken at ISO 6400, and you can see a lot of noise there. And let's take a look at the same image with the 5D4, also at 6400. And there's noise there, but it's not quite as much as the M50. The Canon 5D4 at 6400 is closer to the M50 at 800. Maybe if I shot this M50 at 1600, it would be a little bit closer to the ISO at 6400 on the 5D4. So definitely an advantage there. Let's take a look at this again. This is the Canon 5D Mark IV at 6400 versus the Canon M50 at 6400. You can see a lot of noise and a lot of grain in that shot. To go back to the 5D4, to open up the shadows, and you wouldn't typically do this to an image, but just to see how much is there. You know, I could do something with this. I can make something with this, even if I needed to bring those shadows up. I could make that work. On the M50, on the other hand, opening up the shadows there, it gets really, really unusable. You almost can't even see what the image is in those shadows. It's basically all the detail is gone there. So you don't want to use that at 6400 if you're going to have to bring up dark spots like that, dark areas like that. And the ultimate comparison then is to bump this all the way up to 25-800, which I shoot at sometimes, you know, in really extreme situations. And really, I think we're going to see that's what a camera like the MD4 is really for over a camera like the M50. So this is the M50 at 25,800, and it's really kind of a mess. I mean, there's a ton of noise there. It almost looks like an abstract watercolor painting. A lot of the detail is lost. I would say this is probably not salvageable. We'll take another look at it with some editing. But when I shoot over to the 5D4 at 25,800, I wouldn't want to use this, but you know what? It's got some detail. It still looks kind of sharp. There definitely is a lot of noise there, but I could use it. I could make something out of this. If I needed to bring out the shadows, again, it's going to be very messy, but you can still see in that front area over here, still see some detail. I wouldn't want to have to play with those shadows though. That's really a mess. But if I wanted to clean it up and maybe use some noise reduction, I'd probably have to bring this up pretty significantly to smooth it out. But here's where I'm saying that I can actually use this ISO 25-800 and get, if I need the smoothness and get a smooth, usable image, I can play around with some of my other adjustments, tighten up the composition a little bit. And if I needed to, I can use 25-800 on the 5D4. Not ideal, but it's not an ideal situation where you're using that. And that's the kind of thing that you want to have a camera like the 5D4 in that kind of situation. So this is the unadjusted 5D4 at 25-800. And this is the M50 at 25-800. You're not going to be able to do anything with this. If I want to try to reduce the noise, crank that all the way up to, I don't know, 70 or 80, and it helps the noise a little bit, but the image becomes really, really blurry. You really can't see the detail. You really lose a lot by trying to get rid of the noise in the software. So what does that mean? Well, like I said before, a lot of what we've been saying here is in ideal situations, the M50 stands up to these big cameras really great. At ISO 100, it's not going to make a difference. At ISO 800, it still holds up pretty well against the 5D4. But once you need to go beyond that, once you're going to go into ISO 1600 and up, especially into the higher ISOs, if you're shooting at a really extreme condition, in really dark situation where you have to shoot handheld, that's the kind of situation where a big camera like the 5D4, not just Canon, the big Nikon models also. That's the kind of situation where those cameras definitely have an advantage over a camera like the M50. But it's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off between what you're willing to carry around with you, the use, what you're going to be using the camera for. If most of your shooting is going to be in situations where you don't need an ISO over 1600 or so, and you like having the lightweight and compact features of a camera like the M50, then maybe that's right for you. Maybe that's what you want to use. I've been using both cameras a lot lately, and I love being able to just put the M50 in my pocket rather than having to carry around a big, heavy camera in those ideal situations.
So I hope you found that helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or anything you want to tell us, please put it in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Definitely subscribe to the channel and click on that little notification bell. This way you get notified every time we post a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.